Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Book Review Blog. I am your book reviewer, and today we're going to review the book Night Shift by Stephen King. It is a collection of short stories. There is 20 in all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this into two video reviews. We'll cover the first 10 short stories in this review, and then I'll do another video where I cover the next 10. So let's get started. The first book in this one is a story called Jerusalem's Lot, and if you are familiar with my last review of Salem's Lot, it's very similar. Although Jerusalem's Lot does take place before Salem's Lot did, supposedly, in terms of time. Jerusalem's Lot is a story of letters, and between a man named Charles Boone, and he is writing to somebody named Bones. So it's kind of funny because it's two similar names, and it's in 1850, and Charles Boone is talking to his friend Bones about weird things that he and his kind of assistant Charles are finding in their city of Preacher's Corner, Maine, and they say it's in Cumberland County, Maine, and that's nearby where Salem's Lot is. And he starts by telling Bones that there are weird things going on in his mansion, and that he sees or he hears noises going on in his walls, and he thinks that they're rats. And so he and his companion have gone to town, and they've gone to a local church in this town. And one of the things in this church that frightens Charles is that there is a book on top of, like, the altar, let's say, of this church, or the pulpit, and it's a book of evil. It's a book of, there is like a Latin term, and it's like the thing of worms is what it's called, where it opens up deathly spirits. And when Charles touches this book, he all of a sudden gets shivers, and weird things start to happen in this church. And so he goes home and talks to one of his servant ladies in his house, and the servant lady is really scared when he tells her all about this, and she says, "Oh, well, the same thing happened in this town, Jerusalem's Lot, which isn't very far." So again, having kind of a conversation, a one-sided conversation, in these letters, Charles tells Bones that he and his companion are going to Jerusalem's Lot to check it out. And once they are at Jerusalem's Lot, they find another church that has a similar book, and when Charles touches this book this time, a whole bunch of demons of his ancestors start to appear. Charles has also done research and seen that a lot of his ancestors in this town have come to realize what has happened in Jerusalem's Lot, and they have died because of it. And he thinks that he's going to be the last one in his line because he has no descendants. He has no children and really no nieces or nephews. And that's kind of where that book ends, or at least that's where I'm going to stop with that story. The next story is a story called Graveyard Shift, which has a man who's just known as Hall. He doesn't have a first name, and he's kind of a drifter, and he kind of drifts along to a Maine town, and he takes a job as a mill worker as a third shift, or the graveyard shift, and he's just kind of sitting around. It's in July of whatever year. It doesn't give a year, but Hall's boss, named Warwick, who he doesn't really like very much, offers him a job during the 4th of July week, and he says, the mill is usually closed, but we're going to go down into the basement to clean it out. and you, along with a bunch of other workers, are needed to help this out. We'll give you, extra pay, because it's so bad, and we're going to use hoses, because, again, they're so bad that they have a rat problem. So what they're going to do, essentially, is go down in the basement, hose everything down, and scare the rats away, and then clean it out. Well, that starts out fine, is a couple of days that they work like this, but a lot of the men that are doing this job keep getting bitten by rats. And so as they keep going, these rats are getting bigger and bigger, and they find a trap door in this basement that leads to kind of a sub-basement, and Hall, along with Warwick and somebody else, go down, and because Hall thinks that these are where these rats are, it's like, okay, we'll kind of fish them out, or we'll kind of go and get them and kill them. And what they find down there is remarkable. There's not only rats, but bats down there, and again, these things are huge, and it was kind of scary and very gross. So, and that's where kind of I'll leave this book to you, where you can read what happens in the rest of the story. So, the next story is called Night Surf. And it is about a bunch of college students who, maybe 6 of them, who are on the beach. And you learn through this story that these students are the last ones on Earth because of a virus that they call A6, and they call it Captain Trips, that has wiped out the whole world. If you are familiar with Stephen King's book, The Stand, that is the very similar virus, because in The Stand it is also called Captain Trips. But in the Night Surf, it's mostly known as A6. And basically what it is that these college students, and in the book, one of them dies, and then towards the end, one of them is sick with this A6, and it's a very contagious virus, so they know that it's going to hit them, or at one time. So basically it's like them waiting to get infected by this A6. So it doesn't really have an end to the story. That's just where it ends. So the next book is called I Am the Doorway. And it's about an astronaut named Arthur who goes to Venus, and when he comes back, he somehow becomes infected with this alien who has infected his body. And the only physical signs of this alien has infected his body is that on his hands there are eyeballs that he keeps bandaged. So he always talks about that his hand is bandaged up, and he has an associate named Richard who wants to know what his hand looks like, but Arthur is like, I can't do that because this alien being controls Arthur in a way, and it has controlled Arthur to commit murder and kill a boy in this town that he lives in, and he's afraid that if he unravels his hand, that this alien will have him kill again. And eventually he does. He ends up killing Richard. And so finally what Arthur does is that he sets his hands on fire, or cuts his hands off to get rid of the eyes. But then he realizes that these eyes do not go away, and that the eyes have reformed on his chest. So, and that's where it ends. Again, you don't know what Arthur does with himself after that. It just kind of ends that way. The next story is called The Mangler. It is about an ironing thing at a laundromat. It's a big machine that if you feed in clothes or linens, it'll iron it and fold it for you. This ironing machine has kind of become demon possessed and actually has started killing people, women who work in the laundromat. And what the narrator does, and a bunch of his buddies, is they decide to basically exorcise the demon out of this Mangler. And so they try, but they fail. And it's actually kind of funny because when you read about it, it's scary, but there's like funny parts in it. And the funny parts are that this Mangler machine, which is pinned down to the floor or like screwed to the floor, becomes unhinged and comes out. And so these people who are doing the exorcism run out of this laundromat going, oh my gosh, this thing is coming. And so they run to a friend's house and they're like, okay, it could be coming, it could not be coming. And they listen outside and they hear noises of like footsteps, like think of like big footsteps. And they're like, it's coming, it's gonna go get us. And that's kind of where the story ends. So, the next story is called The Boogie Man. And this is the only one, as far as I know, where Stephen King tells about like an actual boogeyman story. And in my opinion, this was the scariest story in this book. It focuses on a man named Lester Billings, who is in a psychiatrist's office. The psychiatrist is named Dr. Harper. And he tells Dr. Harper how he allowed the boogeyman to kill his 3 kids. Not at once, but one after another. And basically the story is him telling this doctor of how he and his wife first had a son named Denny, and after a few years, Denny was telling his father, don't leave, when he's putting him to bed, don't leave me, the boogeyman is going to get me. And his father just kind of brushes it away like, oh, it's a childhood fear. But then later on that night, he hears his son screaming and rushes in, and his son is already dead. And then the next time he has a daughter, and after a few years, the daughter tells him about the boogeyman, and he's a little more concerned about it, but he doesn't do anything about it. And then again later on that night, the boogeyman gets her, and she's screaming, and she dies as well. And then he tells about his next son, his youngest, and that happens to him as well. And so, and it's a conversation between Lester and Dr. Harper, and all through this, Lester keeps looking at Dr. Harper's closet, making sure that the closet is closed, because every time that the boogeyman comes, he leaves, even though the door is closed. When Lester left the kids' rooms, when he comes back, it's opened a crack. And then Dr. Harper is like, okay, you have had such mental and psychological trauma that you need to come back. So Lester goes out to make an appointment with the nurse, or the receptionist, and the receptionist isn't there, and so he turns around and goes back to Dr. Harper's office to tell him that the receptionist isn't there. And he comes into the room and sees the boogeyman there, the actual boogeyman, in his closet with the door open. And the boogeyman is holding a mask of the doctor's face. So you don't know if the boogeyman was actually in the doctor when when he was having the conversation and the psychiatrist appointment, or if the boogeyman was hiding in the closet, and when Lester left, he killed the doctor. You don't know that. And that's where the story ends. So the next story is Gray Matter, and that story is about a boy who goes to a bar like in town, and tells the barkeeper about that something is very wrong with his dad. And these are like very towny people, so this barkeeper knows his dad and knows the son. And after the son tells the barkeeper all about his father, the barkeeper takes a couple of men in the bar with him, and one is including the narrator who's telling the story. And while they're walking to this kid's house to meet with their dad, he's telling him what the child was telling the barkeeper, and it's basically that this child's father had at one point drunk some bad tasting beer and said, "Oh, this beer tastes bad," and I think he still drank it, but it was kind of a line, just, "Oh, like food tastes bad, okay." But this thing that made the beer taste bad went into this dad's system and made him gray, like made him kind of a jelly creature, like over time, where like he couldn't stand light anymore. He was starting to eat like animals and start to eat people, and so it's very scary. Another one that's kind of scary and very gross. Eventually they do see the dad and noticing what he's become. That's also very gross, but if you're into that, go nuts. I'll leave you with that to see or to figure out what happens when you read the story. But the next story is called Battleground, and that one was kind of funny for me. It's a story about a hitman who has just come home from a job, and the job that he did was to go down to Miami and kill this toy maker, and it's successful. And when he comes back, he has a package waiting for him that's from the toy maker's mother, and what it is it's a Vietnam footlocker full of I wrote it down what it is. It says 20 infantrymen, 10 helicopters, 2 bar men or BAR men, 2 bazooka men, 2 medics, and 4 jeeps. When he opens it, the army men all of a sudden become alive and they jump out and start to attack him. And that's kind of funny because if you think of like little army dudes that are about that big attacking a man, that's where I find humor in this. And so it's basically a battle from the title of this hitman trying to best these army men. And I don't want to spoil the ending. It's just very funny. So I'll let you read that story. The next story is called Trucks, and it's about 6 people who are being held prisoner in a truck stop. Outside this truck stop, there are all types of trucks. There's like Mack trucks, there's semi trucks, there's little pickup trucks sometimes, and nobody is behind the wheel. These trucks have kind of taken a life of their own and has imprisoned these 6 people. And basically it's like, okay, they are going to imprison them for as long as you can imagine. Are these people going to escape? Are they going to be killed by these trucks? You never know, because that's kind of where the book ends. Again, things happen in the book, but I don't want to spoil that for you. But you're left with wondering, do they ever escape? The last story that I'm going to do in this part is called Sometimes They Come Back. It's a story about a man who takes a teaching job, and when he takes this teaching job, he shares with his employer that while he was in teacher's college, he suffered a breakdown because when this man was a boy, he witnessed his brother being murdered by 3 guys, and his wife, or his girlfriend at the time, who turned out to be his wife, was involved in a hit and run during college. She didn't die, but he remembers that was very traumatic for them as well. So he begins this teaching job, and it's going pretty well. And but one of his last class of the day is kind of a remedial class, and he eventually, one of his students just ends up dying, and he's replaced by a student who really looks familiar to this teacher, but he can't place where he's from. And all through this book, he keeps having nightmares of his brother's murder. And eventually another student in his remedial class dies, and he's replaced by another student who looks familiar to this teacher. And then eventually another student dies, and is replaced by a third student who looks familiar. And all of these guys look familiar, and it dawns on this teacher that these three guys were the three kids who murdered his brother. Somehow they had kind of suspended time where they were still young, but like, because they were young, like high school age when his brother was killed, and he's thinking these have got to be like my age, and adults, but no, they had suspended in time, and they were still kids. So that makes him very scared, and these three boys know that he knows who they are, and knows, that they killed his brother, and so they threaten him, and there's a scuffle that ensues afterwards, so, which I won't spoil for you. But that's it. So the next time that you'll see my review is when I review the second part of this book. So I bid you all farewell and happy reading.